Democratic Party has taken unions and the labor movement for granted for 50 years at this point. We're not doing enough to fight back for labor, and politicians should have to earn the support from labor.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
We are starting a series in overtime called Meeting the Moment. I wanted to hear from folks across the political spectrum from various organizations and just kind of hear their hot takes about what's going on and what their message is for those of us who are in the South and, from the working class. So I believe we have someone from Justice Democrats on the line.
Hey, thanks for having me, y'all.
Hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining. First, if you want to just give us a little introduction and tell us who you are and, kind of your journey into this world of politics.
Yeah, I'm Usamah Andrabi. I'm the communications director at Justice Democrats. Born and raised Texan from Houston, Texas. Proud Texan boy. Didn't, for a long time, always kind of thought I was going to get into politics in some way, sense, or form. Growing up in the South, I feel like you either are hyper aware of politics or you hyper ignore it. And growing up as like a Pakistani Muslim in the South, you hyper aware of it. So that kind of is what got me into it, just watching Republican administrations lead what was a pretty particular foreign policy agenda while I was growing up, and then seeing the Democratic Party sort of continue that foreign policy agenda in my adolescence is what brought me to this work through a lot of different places and spaces that eventually got me to Justice Democrats nearly 4 years ago. Before that, I was on the Hill for a brief moment working for a Wisconsin congressman, former union member, Mark Pocan, and co-chair of the Progressive Caucus. The going through all this sort of political hoops, you start seeing some of the gaps and start seeing some of the failures of this Democratic Party kind of through and through of both parties, really. But as someone who's been working within or around the Democratic Party for a long time, Justice Democrats just felt like one of the few organizations that was willing to challenge it at its core and willing to put in the work to transform it. So that's how I got to be here and communications director and spokesperson now. I'll stop there.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, just pick up with that. Just tell us what are the Justice Democrats? What are y'all doing? What do y'all stand for? For someone who's not familiar, which I think at this point a lot of people are, but if someone who doesn't really know much about what y'all are about, what's your message there?
Yeah, so we started about 8 years ago, post the 2016 Trump election and post the 2016 Bernie Sanders campaign as an organization that very much saw through that 2016 campaign a Democratic Party that had been captured by a corporate agenda, donors, and super PACs, and had obstructed not only Bernie Sanders' presidential run, but had failed to beat back what was a clear threat to our country and Donald Trump with what was a much more corporate establishment Democrat and Hillary Clinton, and sort of refused to see the tea leaves in that moment, that the base of this party and working class people across this country were no longer seeing this party as a party that was fighting for its interests. And so, our goal once we started was, very clearly trying to transform not only this party, but particularly Congress through electoral politics, and initially trying to create a brand new Congress and replace as many of these corporate establishment Democrats in Congress with working class leaders and champions, so that we can eventually actually have a block of mission-driven working class leaders in Congress who champion solutions, frankly, as big as the problems we face, and who are not bought or bossed by any sort of moneyed interest, but only by the communities that they serve. So that's been the work for us, and what that looks like, substantively is particularly challenging Democratic incumbents and Democratic primaries. And so our first cycle was the 2018 cycle, and we elected what is now known as sort of the squad, or helped elect many of those members. AOC was one of our first recruits who unseated Joe Crowley. We supported Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and Ayanna Pressley as well. And then since then, there's been a handful of other challengers in open seats, from Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, and Marie Newman in 2020. We recruited and helped elect Summer Lee to Congress in 2022, as well as supported Greg Casar and Delia Ramirez since then. And this cycle, we just launched actually our first primary challenge of the cycle, and first primary challenge in 4 years, actually, which is challenging self-funded multimillionaire in Detroit, Sri Thanadar, with working class leader and champion state rep Donovan McKinney. So, our work first and foremost is trying to take on the Democratic Party in its own backyard in Democratic primaries that for centuries have been a place where no one has had a choice. There's Democratic districts, deep blue districts across this country where you have a Democratic base, you have Democratic voters. These seats are not purple. These are not going towards Republicans, but because of that, voters don't have a choice. They just have to be stuck with their incumbent because that's who the Democrat is. And we've seen the Democratic Party really, chastise anyone who wants to see power change within its own party when they want us to be focusing on taking on Republicans. But, we should be able to do both of these things. And in our mind, the best version of taking on Republicans is building a better Democratic Party first and foremost. And, we have no fabulistic beliefs about what the Democratic Party is or isn't. We know what sort of corrupted, captured institution it is right now, but also believe it as one of the most powerful institutions and parties in this country. And we'd rather transform it than let it continue to be this powerful institution without our say.
Yeah. We're in Alabama. You mentioned you're from Texas. In this moment, 10 years in, what is your message for the Southern working class? We hear it's like Democrat is a dirty word. And we don't have especially in Alabama, we don't have a very strong state party. So a lot of us aren't even used to seeing a Democrat on the ballot at this point. So how are you, thinking about Southern voters and the Southern working class?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the working class kind of across the country, but especially the South, and being from the South, we often see it as just people who are constantly ignored by the sort of consultant class, the donor class, and career politicians in power consistently. And I'll say, first and foremost, I think I just want to be clear and also say that for us, obviously, we're an electoral organization, and we're an organization that focuses on Democratic primaries. But to your point, Democrat is a dirty word in a lot of places, and frankly, elections are a dirty word in a lot of places because people have participated in electoral politics for years, for decades, for centuries, and they feel like, especially working class folks, feel like neither party is doing shit for them. And so, I want to say first and foremost, electoral politics is not the only avenue, as y'all very well know, for us to build power for the working class and for working class to take their power back. And in our view, I think a powerful labor movement and an empowered workers taking their power back through unions is a prerequisite for us to build the sort of power we want to see within the Democratic Party, for us to build this sort of bloc in Congress congressionally. We don't just need new leaders to represent you. We need a activated, galvanized, and excited working class that feels like politicians serve them rather than they serve politicians. And so that starts with building labor power, building union power, fighting for workers' rights. And, I would say to folks, especially down south, who don't feel like they can believe in a Democratic Party, focus your energy on your own power, on labor power, on organizing your workplace, on agitating your union to hire more organizers. Go to these meetings. This is the work that we need to even get to the point where we can elect better leaders in these spaces. Because, like I said, electoral politics is just one lane, but in my mind, especially, there's nothing without a powerful labor movement to lead us forward.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate you, expanding on that, because you're right. Electoral politics is something a lot of working people are disengaged from. A lot of, in Alabama, the last time we had a statewide election, over 60% did not vote. And that's just who's eligible, right? There's plenty of folks
Right.
not eligible to vote down here for various reasons. And then when they did vote, right, there were more unopposed Republicans on the ballot than Democrats. Where they found Democrats, it was often like campaigns in name only, or folks that were also sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce, right? So I think you are just. I appreciate you keeping it real, because I think that's the reality that we are in. That a lot of people are disaffected. There's a lot of potential, in reaching folks like that, but and that does lead me to my next question, which is, given that we are now 100 days into the Trump administration, over 100 days, what do you think we should be doing to respond? And by we, the political class, political leadership, labor leadership, all the way to just rank and file workers who may be tuning into this program. What should we be doing to respond to the crisis that we're in today?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. It's also the $1 million fucking question.
Right.
And I think there's a lot there's a lot of different things for a lot of different folks to do, right? Like, to your point, there's what we have seen, the failure of the political class sort of to meet this moment right now, with particularly Democratic leadership who is more happy to play possum in the face of, fascism and threats to our civil liberties and frankly threats to our economy than to fight back with every tool in their toolbox. And I'm not going to pretend to not understand that the Democrats are in a minority right now. We know that. That's fine. We don't need to be told that again. But then what are you going to do in that minority? We've seen what Republican minorities look like, right? They are still wielding power in any way they can, using archaic Senate rules to obstruct progress, obstruct proceedings. And, first and foremost, at least in Congress, to start from there, we should not be seeing the person who is leading the mass disappearance campaigns across this country, Marco Rubio, was confirmed unanimously in the Senate as the first Trump cabinet member. There should be no single member of the cabinet that Democrats, if they believe that this government and this party is such a threat to our livelihoods and our liberties, no one should be accepted. I don't care if he's your former Senate colleague. Frankly, he was a piece of shit then as well. And so I don't know why we're allowing him to be Secretary of State unanimously. But there's been tons of other confirmations that some members, be it John Fetterman or others, are voting for. There's Chuck Schumer, who literally decided to be a doormat for the Republican Party in the one moment that we had a leverage for, which was the CR, or the continuing resolution, to prevent Republicans to have the power and leverage that they do now to cut taxes for billionaires and corporations and pay for it by cutting Medicaid for our seniors and Medicaid for our poor people and Social Security for our seniors. And so I think that's a part of the failures we are seeing within the Democratic Party leadership. But I also think, this is a moment for other folks to show up and show people what would the Democratic Party fight for then, if they did have power, if they were in the majority. For so many years, this party has failed because it has been a party against something, and that something being Donald Trump and the Republican Party rather than for anything. And I think we saw the effects of that this past election, where more voters who make less than $100,000 for the first time voted for Republicans, and more voters who make over that voted for Democrats. And that's a massive class realignment that we've seen been happening over the last decade or so. But I think it's a clear marker that everyday working class folks in this country are not seeing this party, like I said, as a party that's fighting for its interests. And so we cannot be a party that, says billionaires and corporations are corporate price gouging with one side of our mouth, and then have Mark Cuban be our messenger. This is not the future of the party that we should be doing. If you want to be a party for the working class, be the party of the working class. Don't just figure out what words sound good to everyday people. Bring working class people up through the ranks of this party, not only as politicians, as elected leaders, but as the party apparatus within the DNC, within the DCCC. The work that we are trying to do is to bring more everyday people's voices to what has been a, for lack of a better word, old boys club within the Democratic Party, or old whatever club you want to say, it's a bought corporate establishment that demands some breaking right now, and not just lip service to working class communities, but actually seeing working class people within Democratic Party leadership. And so for the rank and files, for folks on the ground, for everyday people who are just seeing this and are fed up with both their elected representation, but also everything, I think there's a lot of different things to do electorally. I do think there is a massive appetite right now amongst Democratic voters and non-Democratic voters to primary establishment incumbents, which I'll say, as someone who's been doing this work for a while, I haven't seen this sort of appetite from what were core Democratic base members. These are, the resist moms, the folks who are out here on the weekends organizing fight back against Trump rallies. These are the folks who are now fed up with the corporate establishment in the way that we have been for nearly a decade, and are also down to fight back and down to take these shitty bought and sold members of Congress out of Washington. And so I think first and foremost, we encourage anyone who wants to run for Congress, anyone who thinks they could be doing a better job, or anyone who knows someone that they think could be doing a better job than their representative, they should support them in a run for Congress. They can nominate them on our website as well. But even if you don't want to be involved with Justice Democrats, we obviously want you to be, but run a campaign, challenge power. The first step for these folks in Washington to feel threatened is to be threatened. And that's why we exist as an organization, is because we know a lot of working class folks don't have the resources, don't have the infrastructure to challenge what is an entrenched corporate incumbent who gets money from Wall Street, pharma, crypto, and APAC all in one. We try and serve as some of that infrastructure support, but also, if you don't want to be involved in electoral politics, like I said earlier, organize workers, organize your workplace, organize your community, and whatever that looks like, be it through a union, be it through a tenant union, be it through just organizing on the ground. Electoral politics are not the only sphere and arena for us to build political power, and necessarily so it cannot be, right? Electoral politics should be an outcome that we want to transform, in my opinion, because it controls so much of our daily lives. But we can only really build that power and build the sort of power that can take on a corporate incumbent, that can challenge these sort of institutions, when we have organized power on the ground, be it through a union or other organized work versions of what that could look like. And so, I wholly support us doing the work to revive labor power as a means to get the political outcomes we want in this country. And I think we're starting to see that from some unions who are beginning to realize that the Democratic Party has taken unions and the labor movement for granted for 50 years at this point, right? The party itself has accepted unions and workers as on their side, just because they're not the ones who are, outrightly union busting through law always. But we're not doing enough to fight back for labor, and labor should, politicians should have to earn the support from labor. And so on that end, for us, I think we should start having unions not automatically endorse incumbents, just because they're Democrats. We should have that actually be something you earn by showing that you're fighting for workers. And there's obviously incumbents right now, former union members, fighters for the labor movement in Congress, but there's a lot more who don't do shit for workers, for unions, for actually fighting for folks when push comes to shove, because they also are taking millions of dollars from corporate donors. And so I think we should stop letting the Democratic Party get the automatic union bug that it's been getting for about 50 years, and start making these leaders earn the support of the rank and file, and not vice versa.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Yeah, I really love that. And, you mentioned sort of the failures of the Democratic Party. And there's a lot of people that at this point are like, is it even worthwhile to engage with them? That, they've been, like you said earlier, they've been leaving or just like not engaging, what would you say to the people that have already left?
Yeah, I think, I'm not gonna pretend like I don't understand it. Like as someone who works within, at the end of the day, Democratic Party politics and electoral politics, I have also been disillusioned. I've also been like, what's the point of any of this? Like, can we actually build power? If APAC can spend $15 million against a single former nurse or a single middle school principal to buy a seat in Congress, is this worth it? And, for me, it still feels worth it. In that, one, I've seen the sort of people we have been able to elect despite not having the resources, despite not having the money that some of these corporate PACs have. We've been able to elect a small cadre of working class champions in Congress who, just despite being not a big enough block to change what the future of the Democratic Party looks like, has changed this where the Democratic Party is, has made things like Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, raising taxes on billionaires, fighting for Palestinian rights and liberation, all of these things which, even 20, 30 years ago were dirty words in the Democratic Party, especially the Clinton Democratic Party, have transformed to be ubiquitously popular policy positions across the political spectrum, and policies the Democratic Party could champion if they were not so taken over by big money in politics. That's not to say that clearly the majority of the Democratic Party is, and it is an institution that has frankly failed working class people cycle after cycle. For me, I say to the folks who have left, I understand it. Like, I get it. I get feeling like there's nothing to do left in this. For me personally, I believe, this is not a party that's going anywhere in this moment. And right now, we unfortunately are in a two-party system within the United States, and the Democratic Party is one of the most powerful institutions in this country. And I think it's worth continuing to have this fight to transform it rather than let it continue to be both one of the most powerful institutions and also ruled by corporate power. Because even if we are able to sort of build this challenging third power, third party, whatever that looks like, there still will be two other institutions of power taken over by corporations and billionaires. And, I'm not saying that these things should not be happening in parallel with each other. I encourage folks to build power where they see it and where they think it should happen. But at least in Congress and in electoral politics right now, and the way our party system works, I do believe there's a foundation for our movement inside and outside of Congress to build on, to transform what this Democratic Party can look like. And I think that experiment is still ongoing. We've only been doing this for 8 years now, and we've had some setbacks, but we've had some massive wins. We've taken out incumbents that served over 100 years in total together, which, to a lot of people are going to be like, whatever. But for us, it feels like a big deal, especially when we don't have the money that these folks have. And what I have seen over the last few cycles with groups like APAC, with groups like crypto, with these super PACs beginning to organize even better than they were before, is not a powerful lobby, or a well-prepared, well-resourced, but what I feel like I'm seeing are super PACs and money lobbies being scared, because you don't have to spend $15 million if you're from a position of strength or from a position of power. And it just shows to me how powerful working class people are when they ascend to the halls of power, that a former nurse like Cori Bush or a former middle school principal like Jamal Bowman, two of the most working class members Congress has ever seen, were such a threat to billionaires and corporate donors and lobbies that these people had to spend $30 million just to take them out of Congress, I think is a badge of courage for those two folks and for our movement.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot you've said that really, resonates with me in terms of the power building for working people, and that being a focus and a driver, and translating then into electoral success. So, I'm curious, what's on the radar for Justice Democrats in the next year to year and a half, between now and November 2026? What are some of the big things that are on y'all's radar and that you're going to be working on and, hope to be successful at?
Yeah, so our bread and butter, I mean, at the end of the day, we work in concert with a lot of different organizations, activists, unions, and want to support their power. But, to each their own and to each according to their need. And I think all of us have important lanes we should be occupying. And our lane is very particularly Democratic primaries more than anything. And so that's going to be our focus this cycle. Last cycle was the first cycle we didn't run new primary challenges since the start of our organization. And that's because certain lobbies promised that they were going to spend $100 million to take us out. And they did spend over $100 million, but they were unsuccessful in taking us all out. So we ended last cycle being very clear that we wanted to punch back from the start and go back on the offense and take on as many shitty corporate establishment Democrats that we can. And that's what we're doing. We did not anticipate that the Democratic base would be so so thirsty for it, frankly. And this is the most I've ever seen the base energized by willing to take out its own establishment incumbents. That's going to be our focus this cycle, is trying to primary as many do-nothing Democrats as possible, and replace them with actual working class champions and working class people from these districts. And so, like I said, the first one, we just launched our first candidate of the cycle in Detroit, one of the poorest, one of the most working class districts in this country, in Michigan 13th, who's being represented right now by a literal multimillionaire who has spent over $17 million of his own money to buy this seat. He has also spent more taxpayer dollars than any member of Congress promoting himself on billboards and TV ads. He has, invested his own money, campaign money, into crypto money, which is why his first quarter is in the negative right now. He has made over $1 million in stock trades since he got to Congress, and this is only his second term. This man embodies everything, I think, wrong with the Democratic Party and everything wrong with Congress, right? We are seeing what happens when we allow billionaires and corporate super PACs to dictate the agenda and politicians within both parties. Now you have that plus a man who can fund his own self-interest because he's just a self-funded multimillionaire, and the results are clear. I think this race embodies a fight for the future of the party for us because it embodies what so many people across the country are facing. This is a man who can't even pick up the phone for his constituents when there's massive truck derailments of nuclear waste or gun violence that is, some of the largest instances of gun violence that have happened in this district, or the fact that this district still has lead in its water and poison in its air. And, you have people like Donovan McKinney who we're supporting, who's born and raised working class champion in this district, understands what it's like to be evicted over 15 times because of poverty wages growing up, understands what it's like to have a mom who had to work 2 or 3 jobs just to put food on the table, knows what it's like to have to check his kids' lead levels every day to make sure that the water they're drinking is not too poisonous, knows what it's like to have the same asthmatic cough that every single member of his family has, and now that his 3-year-old son has pre-asthma because of the pollution from smokestacks and the auto factories in that district. This is what the type of leadership that we are trying to find for Congress are folks who actually understand the problems that their communities are facing and will then fight with the urgency that their communities need from it. Because when you have millionaires in power, they don't give a shit, frankly, and they don't have to give a shit. They don't worry about how much anything costs or whether their air is breathable. It is breathable, and they don't care. They have the money to pay for the $11 eggs that it costs in Detroit right now. And so that's the work that we're focusing on right now. Donovan's our first endorsed primary challenge, but hopefully not our last. Definitely not our last, I should say. So there's a lot of folks who've already launched their primaries we're excited to possibly support. And there's a lot of people we're talking to in districts across the country. Our approach to this work is we're a small group of folks at JD that live across the country, and we know a lot about where we're from in a lot of different districts, but we don't pretend to know what's best for any working class community across the country. And that's why our candidate recruitment work is a 24/7, 365 type of process where we try and talk to as many people on the ground in these districts, talk to activists, organizers, labor leaders, just anyone who's down to talk to us to hear, do you feel like your community is being served by your representative? Do you have someone else you think would be better? What do you think should be happening in Congress right now? And sometimes we get a lot of folks telling us, what happened in Michigan. We talk to unions, we talk to workers, we talk to advocates and activists. everyone told us, talk to Donovan. Donovan is your guy. And so, we listen to what these communities say. And sometimes some of the communities say, no, we're good. We don't actually want to challenge our incumbent. We like this guy. Y'all may not. And we're like, okay, that's fine. We're not here to carpetbag or parachute into any sort of district and tell them what's better for them. We're here to sort of just listen to the people on the ground and try and provide some support and infrastructure for them to take their power back.
I've really enjoyed this conversation and really appreciate you making the time this morning. If folks want to find out more about Justice Democrats or, get more involved, how can they do that?
Yeah, I mean, we are justicedemocrats.com is our website. All of our social medias are on there. You can find us pretty easily if you search Justice Democrats on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, whatever social media you're on. And also please support, these candidates. Donovan McKinney is not a multimillionaire. He is a working class guy with 2 kids. And he needs your support. So if you can also go to his website, donovanmckinney.com or donovanforcongress.com and support him. He needs the resources right now to take on this multimillionaire. And I've really enjoyed this conversation too, both y'all, and love the Valley Labor Report. And I'm glad the South has folks on like y'all on their side.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. Really appreciate it. And stay in touch.
Please. Anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, take care.
Thanks. Have a good one, y'all.
Yeah, I enjoyed that conversation. Really enjoyed that conversation and appreciated hearing from a political person who, is willing to just keep it real about the situation we're in, and also the importance of labor organizing and labor power, and how that's
even
really
outside of elections.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, because I could really see how easy it is to get hyper focused on elections. A lot of political people we know do that, right? And that's what the news media loves to focus on a lot. It's very like horse race journalism, covering elections. And I think there are real concerns about some of the current, protest energy in the country. Is it just going to be redirected to, vote blue no matter who, right? And I think there are reasons, like he said, to be optimistic that there's a lot of energy for some change. Even among people who are, maybe moderates or liberals, certainly not radicals by any means, but people seem to be ready for change, seem, willing to step out a little bit more. Seems like there's a desire for a break with the status quo. I think people are tired of do-nothing politicians. And, I think if you're going to tell the country that we are facing, existential crisis, you have to act like it. And, I think we're starting to see, who is and who isn't. And I think that's going to be really helpful in the days and months and years ahead as we figure out who we can work with and who we can't.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.